everybody. Welcome. Oh, forgot my hat. New, different hat. I got a Mickey hat. I'm all Disneyed out actually today. Welcome to the show. This is the Untitled Theme Entertainment Design Show, episode 101. And everything's going to go smooth and fine on this. That's an inside theme park Disney reference there. So we're doing 10 questions with Theron Skees. We're really excited to have him out. He has a great book going. Andy Garfield, my co-host, is going to be joining us in just a few moments. He's been stalled just a little bit. But we're going to go ahead and dive right into the show. So we're going to go ahead and bring our guest on. Come on. Woo! That was me. How's it
going? Great. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
So sometimes what happens is that I used to kind of be the producer of the show and I have the controls. And so I'll do something right after the producers do it. And then it drives everyone nuts, or just them. So that was.
I think they call that overproducing. I don't know, maybe, but
yeah, no, that's definitely it. But it's hard because I know the software, and so sometimes I do little things here and there. Well, welcome to the show. How are you doing today? How's your weekend?
Great, fabulous. Looking forward to coming on and talking to you guys about my favorite subject, which is themed entertainment design. So perfect.
Yeah, we're going to talk all sorts of different topics throughout the show. But first, why don't we go ahead and do your personal introduction, and do you want to talk through your slideshow when we do this?
Sure. That'd be no problem.
Okay, cool. So welcome on, and give us your story here.
That's cool. Well, I've been in themed entertainment, the industry, for about 30 years, a little bit longer than 30 years. I started in film, made the transition into themed entertainment because I worked behind the scenes. I was a set builder, a scenic painter, and a sculptor, and ended up making the transition into theme park work in artificial rock work. So that was kind of an interesting way to start in the field, carving mountains and all this good stuff. So very, very used to construction sites. And then over time, just learned a lot, made my way into art direction, creative direction, and was with Walt Disney Imagineering for 23 years. A lot of fun, incredible times, and got to do a lot of really neat things on 3 different continents, attractions and theme parks, and got to work outside of theme parks in what Disney calls RD&E, which is retail dining and entertainment. I had the great pleasure of leading the Disney Springs team as the executive creative director. And then the last role with Disney was at the Disney Cruise Line. So I believe, Patrick, you just went on the Disney Wish. My team started, I was with them for 5 years. So we did all the design for Triton level ships, got most of the first ship completely done, and laid the groundwork for the other 2 ships. So really fun career, working on a lot of different things. I currently, I should say in 2020, I was laid off during the COVID pandemic. Turned out to be probably the best move in my professional career. I got to start my own little boutique firm called the Designers Creative Studio. And I've been working with clients all over the world ever since. Been a real blast, actually.
Well, that's great. Well, and quite a Rolodex of different projects. It looked like you had Tower of Terror in Paris, part of that. The Triton class ships and Disney Springs, and of course, those are all It's one thing to speak to projects that are, I don't want to call them obscure, but not everyone's worked on, but everyone knows what Disney Springs is, and it's like the most trafficked place in the world, right? It has more traffic than Magic Kingdom does, something like that.
Yeah.
So everyone's seen your work in quite a unique project. And I know that had various stages of development along the way, which is cool. So wide range of projects you've worked on, and also working on your own things right now, which is really cool. And so there's a lot to cover, and we talk about it. There's maybe a 2-part episode. We'll have you back if we don't miss anything. We have 10 questions, but I'm sure each question is going to be getting more and more questions. And actually, I do have a question. So there were 5 hats, Charlie, on one of those slides. Can you tell us which those projects were from? It's kind of like your Mount Rushmore of projects almost.
Mount Rushmore. Yeah, if you pull up the image, there are, I think there's 4 hard hats, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. So on the far left, as reviewing the screen, the blue hard hat is Disney Cruise Line. The yellowish hard hat there beside the blue is the hard hat they issued us in Hong Kong. I worked there for a little 4 years, a little over 4 years, and you couldn't wear the traditional brown hard hat in China. It was some regulation, so we ended up with this interesting yellow one. The one that's just beneath my head there, that's brown but has the ridges that go across it. That was issued for my project work in Paris, because again, they didn't have the classic steel workers helmet. That's where the Imagineering hard hat comes from, is their steel workers helmet. So that one is Paris. And then all the way on the right is the traditional domestic or US Imagineering hard hat. There's one hat that I left out. I just couldn't put it in there. It's called the bump hat, and it's really interesting. It's like a hard hat, but it actually fits like your baseball cap. And they created those for work on the ships because they realized you didn't have a lot of heavy stuff, steel overhead, scaffolding, but you still wanted your head protected. So it has a fabric baseball cap look, which was really cool. It's called a bump hat. Oh,
It's
you're
probably
mute.
it's probably smaller too, so you're not bumping into things on the ships. Is that
Yeah.
when you go?
Yeah, the visor was tighter and everything. It was really cool. Not as heavy. Those other hats can get kind of unwieldy.
Yeah, I mean, where do you even fit them in the ship, right? No, so kind of going back to the beginning, you kind of spoke a little bit about it, but what was your first break into the industry? And did you know it was an industry? Those kind of things. What were your kind of your early aspirations? You started in film, then it sounded like you did a little bit of transition. You want to speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. I always wanted to be in film. That was since I saw Star Wars, the original, A New Hope. I saw that when I was 10, and I just thought, this is what I got to do with my life. I don't even know what it is, but I got to do this. It's too cool. And then so I really pursued a career in film. I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I definitely wanted to be behind the camera. And I was, in my original mind, I was thinking, I want to build these worlds and I want to, creatures and all this stuff. So that's where my wife and I moved to Orlando, because at the time, and I'll really date myself here, I moved to Orlando in 1988, because it was Hollywood East. Disney was building Disney MGM Studios. Universal was building their base park here, and they had the studios built. The sound stages rather at Universal were built first, and so I started working on HBO films, Cinemax films. There were different shows that came on that I got to work on and gained an enormous amount of experience. But you know what it's like, Patrick, when you're freelancing, you'll pick up kind of any work. And in between shows, I picked up work sculpting rocks at the base park for Universal Studios. So for anybody that's familiar with the studio park, there's a big lagoon in the center, and there's like sort of a New York park that surrounds it with a bunch of rock work. Well, that was my very first theme park job. And as luck would have it, I met a guy named Jolt Horme. So maybe some people in your audience may know Jolt, pretty famous Imagineer in the world of sculpting and artificial rock work. And I mean, responsible for guiding the Tree of Life and the caldera in Tokyo and on and on and on, Radiator Springs. Really, really amazing artist and a really fun person to work with. Well, after the Universal job, I went back to, I think it was Superboy we were shooting, and I was the scenic artist for that, lead scenic. And literally, as we were wrapping the show, it was about 6 months worth of work. As we were wrapping the show, I get a call on stage by Jolt, who said they really needed my help in Paris for Euro Disneyland. So I thought, I wrapped up here, might be a way for my wife and I to save some money. So she went to live with her folks, and I scuttled off to Paris and stayed there during the base park construction in 91, where I did rock work for Pirates of the Caribbean for a little over 4 months. But it was like 15-hour days, 6 days a week for that.
Wow.
That was kind of my first real theme park work was there. And then I didn't get hired full time, I should say, at Imagineering all the way until 1998. I was hired in 97 as a consultant for about a year right here in Orlando. And then in 98, I got offered a full-time role as the art director for Disney MGM Studios, believe it or not.
Yeah, and that's cool. So I don't think we've had anybody on here speak about that art director role. Actually, well, we have mutual friends and people that we know that do that role. And
Yeah.
can you speak to a little bit about that role and what they're all about and shaping and guiding the the park?
Sure. The art director role as a title, specifically for Imagineering, I'm not sure if the other legacy brands like Universal Creative or Merlin Entertainment, for example, I don't know if they use it the same way. But at Imagineering, the art director role always was this really versatile role. So on one end of the spectrum, you would fill the role of an art director on a project as really kind of an assistant, or I shouldn't say assistant, really more of the production person working for the creative director. So an art director, it wouldn't be unusual to have multiple 5, 6, 10, however large the project is, art directors. And they might be working in the field guiding facades or rock work. They might be working in an attraction guiding the show set installation. In China, we had art directors that literally lived in different cities all around Southeast Asia where different aspects of attractions were being fabricated, and those art directors went and literally lived within the factory to give guidance and to watch every step of the fabrication. So that's kind of one side. And those art directors, especially the field art directors, could be very diverse. You could be specialized in paint, you could be specialized in sculpture and facades or rock work. I think you get the picture. The other side of art director, and I've done both of those roles, but the other side of the art director is the lead WDI partner or representative in a theme park, primarily in Florida and California. When you go to international parks, that role changes up a little bit because it's quite a bit larger role. The art director role, my role at the Disney MGM Studios at the time, of course, everybody knows this Disney Hollywood Studios now, is you're literally the representative for Imagineering, and you're embedded with the operations team. Now, for me, as a first full-time role for the company, it was so perfect because I never worked with Disney before. You run into a lot of people, Patrick, and I think some of your origin story is this way too, where you did work in the park system. And the benefit of that is that you really get to understand the business and how to work with guests. So that's what that role really did for me. I was there 8 years, and it really helped me to understand the business and really what was important to operations in that role. And anyways, that was kind of a really great foundation for the rest of my career.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Well, everything's interesting, right? When I'm
I
talking
hope.
to emerging professionals, young professionals, people who are trying to break into the industry, and let's just say they don't get an internship or they don't get that first gig, my number one thing I say is go work in the theme parks. Just go work in them. And you're in the industry, you're learning and understanding the operational needs and the business needs. You get really, as an art director, you get real, you get a real hands-on look of what is driving these projects. For instance, it could be, hey, we need a restaurant to have more capacity. And so, hey, you know what? It costs the same to just, retheme a restaurant as it is to expand it. So we can change the theme and do something different or whatever. And then, the park art directors, and I think now they're actually called creative directors. So they adjusted the title, which is cool.
Interesting.
They're able to be that guiding light and all that.
Yeah.
So
Keepers of the flame. Typically, for those listeners or any of your audience members that are tuning in that maybe didn't realize this, for Disney, every single resort destination in the world, I think there's 12 of them if I'm counting them correctly. There's an Imagineering team that's embedded with that operations group all around the world. So what's amazing about that is that as that operations group is making decisions and evolving and changing the resort to keep up with the various needs of the guests and frankly, the changing demands of the guests, that Imagineering team can keep pace and to help and really be a part of the new and fresh designs. And I think that's really important. Patrick, one of the biggest things that I learned being in that art director role that affected all of the design and creative direction that I did for the rest of my career was to really appreciate the importance of that frontline employee. Disney, of course, calls them cast members, but the importance of that role is that those individuals bring those themed environments to life. I mean, you could walk in with no cast members and it would be interesting, but for about 30 minutes, it would feel like a ghost town. It'd feel completely dead. So when you see environments that the cast work in that are not really designed really good, maybe they're the older ones, maybe it's got a really short BGM cycle, right? The background music is only 30 minutes or 45 minutes. The fatigue that those cast members experience translates into not the happiest attitude, and you understand why. And there's many, many reasons, ergonomics and some other things. So that made such an impression on me that I really wanted to take that into the rest of my career to support design, physical design that supported a really good environment for the operating cast.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. No, and it's knowledge that you're going to have in your toolbox, your entire way, particularly when like decisions are being made really early in the process, when they're not in the operations teams aren't in the room, because, not a lot of people have that kind of experience, especially if you're working for a firm. The client may have never operated the theme park or whatever experience. Right. They may not have that knowledge. And so being able to bring that, if there's an issue on opening day and that it could have been solved by just having the right people in the room or the right experience in the room,
So true.
That's important. Well, speaking of that, could you speak to a little bit about when you became a creative executive? So you were an art director, and then at some point, and then once you become a creative executive, maybe talk about that creative process that you have, if you can speak to that.
Sure. I got promoted to a creative executive when I went to Hong Kong. So I was in Paris as a creative director for Tower of Terror in the Walt Disney Studios Paris park. And what was interesting about that was that particular team had already been working together for, I think, a little over a year. And the creative director that was assigned that role came out of the California team. And I believe that there was an emergency in this gentleman's family, and he had to leave very quickly. So the team was without that creative direction. And I think they were looking, and my name got thrown in the hat, and it just, 1 + 1 = 2. And I ended up going. But what was interesting is that I had never worked with that team before. I had worked in France before, so I knew a little French and I was okay. But right after that role, my family and I moved directly to Hong Kong, and that was a director role. So that was my promotion. And in a sense, that role was an SQS role, show quality standards. And the reason it was a director role is because I was overseeing literally that whole resort as a part of a 2-tiered leadership. So there was a project delivery individual and then a creative, and that was me. We were both directors. And there was, as you can imagine, that was only 3 years after opening the park. So there was an enormous amount of work to build the infrastructure of the team to actually be able to function on a daily basis. And then during that time, the whole resort expanded with Grizzly Gulch, Mystic Point, and the Toy Story Land. There's quite a bit of work that went on there with the government and everything too. So it was a really big job that happened. And what's interesting about being a creative executive, especially for Imagineering, again, it may be different now. This was when I was there. You had functional leaders and you had non-functional leaders. You had leaders of projects. And I got the opportunity to do both. So a functional leaders, you have multiple people reporting to you. You're basically mentoring them, giving them direction, reviewing, the performance, all of that stuff, dealing with everything that you would with employees, which is sometimes a challenge. So that was kind of my role in Hong Kong. And then I think your other question was creative process. Is that right? Do you want to follow up with anything I just said about?
No, I'll get it. Well, what I would say is that, I really do. And I've been able to go to the Hong Kong Disney Resort before. Disneyland Resort, and it's just a cool little, like, it's the smallest one, but it's also very relaxing and like no stress, So it's like,
True.
sometimes you go to Disneyland, in the Disneyland Resort, you feel like you got to go on a million rides, and you got to keep running. And while Disney World is a beast, it's like it's a whole city, right? And in Hong Kong, it's just like you can really go there and relax and like the Disney wonder and all that. That's my only commentary I was going to say. But
it's a gem. It really is. It's actually the only other park. I've seen photos of Shanghai. I haven't been there, but it's the only other park with green mountains in the background. So it's this perfect sort of fantasy land representation for where the castle should sit in that view. So that was kind of one of my favorite aspects of it as well.
Yeah. Well, no, now your process from like an executive perspective, right?
Sure. My process. Well, I kind of look at it as you have a leadership role as a creative leader. I mean, there's many different leadership roles. As a creative leader, I felt that it was really, really important to establish a vision for not just the members of my team, the creative team, pardon me, but you really, especially on project work, as a creative executive, you have to set the vision for the project that you're on or the resort you're based in, wherever your leadership is, so that everybody can align with that vision. And you may have the initial vision, but the contribution of everybody and all of their expertise and professionality and ideas makes the vision even better all the way through, right? Like Joe Rohde may have had the idea for Animal Kingdom, but after everybody got their opportunity to contribute and design and build and special effects and lighting and landscaping at the other end coming through, I'm sure he would say it was even bigger and better and more fulfilled than my initial vision, because you had all these great opportunity for all these great people to contribute. And I really always felt that way as a creative lead. My process was just that: establish a vision, make it the North Star for the project. And I always, and I caught heat for this at Imagineering, I think just because it was very different in the creative world. And I always looked at Walt Disney World or Walt Disney Company as my client. I'm the Imagineer. I'm the one that's responsible with my team to deliver whatever this project is. And if I was working in Hong Kong, then Hong Kong Disneyland was my client. If I was working for Disney World, then Disney World was my client, et cetera. If I'm in France, Disneyland Paris, that leadership is my client. And I always thought that was really important, because each one of them, even though it's an umbrella brand, there are such subtle nuances and differences about each location that if you don't think of it in those terms, you might miss them. For example, in Hong Kong, all the original popcorn carts were made exactly like they were in the 1955 version that Walt produced for California. They were all wood. Well, within 3 years, they were just piles of sawdust in Hong Kong, because it's right on the ocean. Super high humidity and very caustic winds and environment. It just wasn't thought about, or it wasn't adapted or changed. So those types of things, that's how I like to lead. The last thing that I'll say, and I took this into my own practice right now, it's a practice I call narrative experience design. I work that way with all of my clients today. And that is taking 3 elements of the client, right? Their brand, the audience that they serve, and their business objectives. And the audience they serve may change based on the project that you're doing. But if you understand those 3 things, brand, audience, and the business objectives of the particular project, you can then tailor make a story that encapsulates those 3 elements. And then when you pitch that to the client buys into it. Well, now they're buying into your story, because the story is the mechanism that delivers the project. I just think that's so important, rather than just painting the story, on the design when it's done. It becomes an integral part of delivering it for the client. Long answer for a short question.
No, well, it's unique. Well, no, I appreciate that, and getting those local needs, it's important. And I could see how, like, if they didn't have like an ops team in place that had ran a theme park before in Hong Kong, they wouldn't know, that could be a miss, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
how
they
many times?
wanted.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they wanted to. A part of their strategy, which is smart, was to hire locally. Well, the problem was at that particular time in Hong Kong culture, if you weren't a banker or financier or a business person of some kind of scientist, you were kind of ranked a little lower in society. You were kind of thought to have not been very successful. So even as a singer, a musician, a dancer, an artist, you were kind of, there was an importance to it, but it wasn't the same as being an MBA or something. So Disney really worked to try to change that. And I'm really proud of being a part of the team that did that. We introduced a program called Imaginations Asia, which was based on the domestic program called Imaginations, which has been around for 20 plus years in the US. And it was just really great way to engage universities and creative people in the region and really elevate them as a profession, so that Hong Kong Disneyland could have a deeper pool to hire from in the future. So anyways, one thing that you'd never think of as an Imagineer being able to do, but that in turn became a really important sustainment program for the resort.
And then, how many times did you take your family to Ocean Park?
Probably 2 or 3 times.
3 times. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Makes
we went
sense.
to, what was the one in Shenzhen? Um, I'm forgetting the name of the regional southern China park. I'll remember it in a little bit. Went there before. Macau a lot of times. It was great.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I was thinking that there could have been some talent in Macau that's building all those resorts, but I guess, who knows,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
you go. So next question. So over the years, you've developed teams, been a part of teams, you've led teams, what do you think makes a good team mate? Let's say a team, like team player or somebody that's going to thrive
Mm.
on a project. How do you like to assemble a team in general?
It's such an important question because, and I talk to students and, as you said, the next generation, young professionals, new professionals all the time. And there's two things that I always try to and make sure that they understand before they get into the industry. And one is that you're always going to be working on a dynamic team. Always. There will be very few times when it's just, you as a lone wolf out there, creating concepts for Bob Iger. It just doesn't work that way. And the teams themselves are extremely dynamic. So, we could probably talk for a whole hour about that. I'll summarize by saying that the different categories of disciplines that you find on a project, I categorize them, in a few different ways. You've got a creative group, you've got a design group, you've got a delivery group, you have specialty groups, you've got an administrative kind of group, contracts and finance and scheduling and risk management. All of these different categories, if you will, of disciplines that they all have to work together, but they approach things different. They think differently, right? Creatives think non-linearly. Project delivery and designers are thinking very linearly. Their reward structures are different. Their performance is different, but yet they're all slammed together in a project where they have to find a way to get along. So that is one part really super exciting, and it's one part can be very frustrating. So I always say that there's going to always be tension on a team, and it's the team members' individual responsibility to keep the tension very positive. Because if that tension is positive, think about a bow and arrow, right? It's that spring is loaded and can propel you forward, and that's kind of the way that we like to try to keep our teams is tense. The tension's going to be there. You might have $1 billion project. That's enormous investment over 4 or 5 years, right? Use that tension to move yourself forward. The superpower that a lot of people have that they may not employ as frequently as they should is the power of listening, right? Actively listening, not just thinking about what you're going to say when the person talking is done talking. You have to listen to your client. You have to listen to your peers. You need to listen to all of your fellow members on your project team. Listening is hugely important. And then the last thing I would say is that every single individual who works in themed experience design will always be working for a client. I usually need to remind my creative brothers and sisters about this, because I think in their minds, they're thinking, woo, 300 million, that's my private art account. I can kind of build and do whatever I want. And the realization is that everything that's done on a project is for a client. So if the client owns everything, it's not your work. So don't fall in love with it, right? A team is about bringing solutions to the client, and that's how I try to structure teams and to think about it in that way.
No, appreciate that, and that was great information. I'm gonna speed ahead a little bit.
Sure.
Some more questions, because now we're gonna go to life after Disney a little bit. So you left so this is gonna be a lot of information throughout you. Disney,
Sure.
You left Disney, and you've started your own firm, and now you have a book, and so love to hear about what it was like, the differences of that role, and then maybe after that talking a little bit about your book and what people can expect from it. That's a lot of questions, but I think that those are probably they all probably intertwine, right, with your creative development and all that experience. So those topics are for you.
Absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity. Basically it was during the pandemic, 2020, as I'm sure it affected many of your listeners and viewers as well. Many people were laid off, and I was a part of that group. But and as frustrating as being furloughed for 7 months was, and actually getting laid off, it was only like 15 months before early retirement. So I unfortunately missed all those benefits as well. But the reality is that became the best move of my whole professional career, believe it or not. It gave me the opportunity to really stop, because especially as a senior executive, I left Disney as a creative vice president, leading the cruise line. And that portfolio was about $5 billion with the 3 new ships, existing fleet. And at the time, Lighthouse Point, which is the new Bahamian destination for the cruise line, my team was working with the cruise line to really find that destination. So lots of float plane trips and kayaks floating around Bahamian islands to find the right one, which was pretty cool. So making that transition, that time gave me the opportunity to ask some questions. And the first question was, am I just an attractions person? Is that my experience? Would I just go to work for Universal next? Would I go to work for another design firm, or what would I do? And what do I know? How would I tell somebody about what I do and what I did? And the big question was, would it be important? Is it valuable? Is everything that I've done? I mean, it was fun. It was amazing. And it was very transformational for me. And I felt like it touched, lots of people, but I wanted to ask myself the hard questions. Is it valuable? Would it be valuable anywhere? And after a lot of research and kind of looking around and reading books, and because it was the pandemic, you had a lot of time to do that. What I really deciphered was that what I did at Disney, when you boil it down, really wasn't just attraction design or even experience design. It was something wholly different. And I really thought that every single segment of the global economy could use it, if you packaged it right. Because what CEO or what CFO wouldn't say, yeah, I would like a stronger emotional connection between my brand and my customer. And that's what I really realized that I'd learned how to do, is to take a brand, take everything about that brand, and to create a physical, sometimes digital experience about that brand that was based on stories about that brand. And the whole idea of that experience was to connect the audience, or connect the guests, if you will, to the brand in multiple different ways. So I thought, well, that whole ecosystem, that process could be very valuable for really any kind of business in the world. So that's when I started my company, the Designers Creative Studio, and it literally is just a solopreneur, work in many different ways. And if the projects get bigger, or I need some experts that do other things that other than what I do. I have such a great curated global team of friends and colleagues. I just pull in the people that I need to get that done. And all of that led to the creation of what I started with was courses. I started an online course. It was very cathartic to go through the process of, what do I know? Would it be valuable to people? And that's kind of what I started. And I had so many close friends within my circle say, you should write a book. And I kept resisting and saying, I'm not a writer. That's not what I do. And it happened so frequently that I really took a look at it and said, okay, I think I can do this. So I have a really good publisher. I jumped right in. I've written the book. The publisher and I are in the process of actually designing it. I'm designing every page, all the illustrations, the graphics. And the intent is that it's a very usable guide that covers the entire realm of a person's work within themed experience design. So the name of the book is Creating Memorable Worlds, a Journey into Themed Experience Design. And my hope was to create something that would really serve as this sort of essential guide for people who wanted to get into the industry. And it covers literally everything, starts with the fundamentals, goes through who works in the industry, how are teams formed, what are the processes, how do you structure things creatively, the process itself, the fact that the industry is global, and how does that have an effect on projects. Since I've worked on 3 continents, I try to bring that experience here. And then lastly, can you go beyond themed entertainment? And taking my experience from moving from 23 years with Disney, 30 years in the industry, and applying it to now different segments of the global economy, I want to bring that information to people, to readers, right? So if you've been in the industry a while and you're like, I want to move and do something different, hopefully this will give you some guiding principles on how to do that. And then lastly, Patrick, is the last chapter 9 is called The Story of You. And the whole idea is to take readers and to show them everything in the book literally is like a map of the industry. And it gives you ways to methods to identify what you're passionate about, what you're skilled at, and how to kind of chart your course and navigate your way through the industry. That's my goal with the book. It's in pre-order now. We publish and ship in the spring, and we've had some really good responses and some excitement, and I'm excited to get into people's hands.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like somebody could just read this book and they'd enjoy it. But then it also sounds like it's almost like a workbook, like maybe I'm not getting. I forget what they used to call that, where you could
No, you're right.
work on it and do all that kind of stuff. It's like, how can people make the most of reading your book, would you say?
Well, there's a couple of ways to read it, right? One way is to read it synchronously, right? You start with the introduction and you go all the way through synchronously, chapter by chapter, to the very end, which is chock full of the end is resources and all the different positions that you would find, disciplines and roles in the industry, and a bunch of stuff. Or you could literally go by chapter to reference it. So say you're a student and the semester you're working on a project that's really driving you with the process. You start here, then you do this. Well, you could just open literally to chapter 6 and start going through the exact process. If you needed some information on, wow, I wonder, how we could do this differently as a team, flip to the chapter on teams and open that up. So that's my hope, is that it's usable, that people underline it and write in the margins and post-it notes and everything, which drives my publisher crazy, by the way. He's very much like, white knuckled over the fact that I said that, because books are precious to him and he wants it on the shelf to be really nice. But I really, it's a soft cover, it's got a lot of design. I'm pouring a lot of passionate design into it, but I want people to use it. That's the key.
Well, that's great. Well, I will be buying a copy. So I look forward to getting your signature on it and autographed and notated, and for using it and looking at it.
Absolutely. Well, Patrick, if you pre-order, the first 250 people that pre-order get what we call the signature bundle. And that is a signed and autographed book, but also those books are numbered. So if you're the first 250 people that order, you get a numbered book. Also with that comes a bunch of really cool stuff, right? A custom bookmark. I'm actually sending out what's called a quick reference guide to themed experience design. That'll be an 8.5 by 11 sheet on 2 sides with a quick reference, and then you get access to this really cool AI curator, knowledge curator. So I have this thing that I'm doing. It's really cool. I can't wait to show everybody about it. That'll basically be like a chatbot in a sense, but it has access to all of my knowledge. So you can ask it questions again. Well, how long does a queue line need to be if this, or how do we start the creative design process, or what's the difference between an art director and a creative director, right? You can type all these questions and it'll give you all these answers. So anyways, check it out. It's on the website. Goes through all of the cool stuff you get in the signature bundle if you pre-order.
That's great. And you're a great salesperson too. You really get all your plugs in. I appreciate that. So just a few
cool
more
stuff. I'm like, man, I would have loved to have had this when I was just starting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know a lot of people like when these books come out from executives and industry creatives, like, they're amazing resources. And, my generation, we had like the yellow architecture book and the Disney Imagineering blue book with Sorcerer Mickey on it. And then you kind of had
Right.
these random books. I actually have one on that was like the resources were ridiculous pre-internet. So
right, that's right.
It's great that we have these. So I swear I have a book I was gonna somewhere in here. Anyways, so a few more questions
Sure.
before we land the plane here. And of course, we want to have you back on to talk more. I mean, there were a lot of questions I wanted to get to that I didn't really get to. So I wanted to ask more questions. Unfortunately,
Sure.
Andy's computer is completely dead, so he was not able to join us. He sends his apologies.
Oh no.
So speaking of emerging professionals, you had an emerging professional ask this to you recently. You thought it was an interesting question, so we wanted to talk about it here today, which is
great.
It's the work-life balance. And I also will say that I feel like there's a work-life balance perception or idea pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? Which is interesting. I think that so many of us were just in the rat race. You're spending an hour and a half, 2 hours driving to work or doing this, 5, 7, 8 days a week. And then the pandemic showed that a lot of jobs can be done remotely, particularly, maybe corporate jobs or jobs that we were a part of.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of people think that it's important to be all together, but, neither here nor there. The long and short of it is that it can be a very demanding job, and one that people can really throw themselves into, especially since it's a lot of people's passions, like you're passionate, obsessed with it. But then also it's important, it's life, family, work, friends. And so, what are your thoughts on that? How to keep that work-life balance in perspective?
I really appreciate the question because it's so important to keep that balance. And, life-work balance, you have a lot of companies that you kind of hear them say that, right? And it becomes a bit of a mantra, something that's hung on the wall. And it's really so much more than that. I think the way that I look at it is that because, especially in this industry, you said it, Patrick, you're so passionate about what you do and people love what you do. It's, it involves problem solving. So you're constantly like in there trying to make this thing work. There are insane deadlines. I can't tell you how many times on projects I was sleeping under my desk, not going home and going back out and working. And I think I would recommend to your audience that you think about it in terms of a bank account, right? I think all of us know that if you just paid all your bills out of your bank account, nobody writes checks anymore. So those would be digital payments. Without actually depositing anything in it, you're quickly going to get to zero. I think that we should look at ourselves in the same manner, right? If you're paying all these bills, right? If you're paying out energy to projects and individuals and picking up more responsibilities and staying late and working through the weekends, you have to be able to reinvest. You have to be able to redeposit back into yourself, your family, your loved ones. It doesn't have to be a spouse. It could just be the people that are close to you in your life. Um, Getting around those individuals that are outside of your work and the people that you work with can also be really important to help balance your perspective, right? If you're only working on a project and you're literally, like me, carving rock for 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, I mean, you have a very limited bandwidth of the rest of the world. So that's what I would say. Keep yourself balanced that way, or you can lose it really quickly. A special note for my creative folks out there, and not that it requires more than other disciplines, but creative is a costly role because you're constantly expelling energy, right? In a sense, it's like creativity on demand. Drop a quarter in the machine, you need to pump out an idea. That creative well has to be filled, and the only way to do that is to give yourself a break and to create a balance in your life. You will end up with the right level of meaning in your work if you do this. Otherwise, it would be easy to be overcommitted and lose your way, and your work would suffer, and your family's going to suffer as well.
No, great. No, that's really appreciate that. Great things to think about. And often a question, I think,
Good for the holidays.
newer generation. Yes. Well, I mean, this whole industry goes to sleep for the whole month. Well, anyways, like between after IAP is like, okay, we'll talk to you in January after that. It feels
Right.
like.
Totally.
So now we know just kind of like the final questions. And we always like to close with this question before we get, how to contact you. What is your advice for those that are early on in their careers or they're trying to break in? And maybe those, you took you about 10 years of freelancing and creative consulting, maybe even more before you landed that first full-time role, right? And
Yeah.
that is a very scary thing it's a thing we hear a lot of, like, well, how do you even do that, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of giving a couple irons in the fire to discuss, what would your advice be to those who are trying to break in here and now to the industry?
Sure. I I did it at a time when you could do what I'm about to explain, and I kind of went what I would call the trades route, right? I did 2 years in a junior college in Montana, right, which was a degree that is not going to really mean anything to anybody. It's like you hear of Ivy League. Well, this is like the dirt league, right? So it was a great start, and I had good intentions of going and getting my 4-year degree. But I met this woman and I fell in love, and it's that great story. And we moved to Orlando, and I ended up going the trades route in the sense that I was working and learning from different masters and curated. I was super hungry learner, very curious, and curated all my education and learning as I got paid for the roles. And as you said, it took a little while. And I don't know that you can do that today. You could, certainly there's a way, but there are so many programs now, academic programs, formal university degree programs that will really educate you quite well in this particular industry. And I know a lot of students, a lot of individuals who are passionate about their career in this industry go that route. The thing that I would really highly advise and encourage you is, if you go the academic route, please, 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 the thing that you should learn the most from that route is to learn a love of learning. Because just because you get a 4-year degree and you spent 90 grand or whatever it is, doesn't mean that you know everything you need to know. It's an extremely, very highly specialized industry, and it will take you at least 3 years to really get your feet and to really understand it, even after coming out of a degree program. So that's my warning to you. And my what I would love to see is that you constantly grow, constantly learn, never lose your curiosity, for hungry for learning new things and exploring and experimenting with new things, is really going to set you apart as an individual professional in this industry. So I don't know. That's what I would say. I say there's two ways, and university may be quicker at the end of the day, because you said mine was like 10 years, but you learn a lot.
Yeah, well, and also to that point is, there's a lot of projects that are story or project based, and a lot of times internships end, and a lot of times, you have to jump around, or it's particularly depending on what it is your role is, like concept artists or creative writers. That is a
Right.
very project based thing, right? There's no,
Yeah.
well, not to get into that, like it's a very difficult thing to get into.
Yeah.
And there also is maybe a perception of people when you go to school and you come out and you're like, all right, ready to be a creative director, and it's like you're starting at ground zero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
like that aspect of it, right? So it's
Yeah.
we were able to work on projects together, which was really great during our time, and
Totally.
you bring such an in-depth knowledge, particularly your international experience, and then you worked on various sides of the industry, whether it was literally working on rocks and installation, important, all the way to being an art director and sitting in meetings and hearing all those different perspectives. And so like those kind of things are all part of your toolbox that are very valuable and all that.
Right.
And
Right.
speaking of which, if anybody wants to get in contact to use your brain power and your toolbox and all that, or to get in touch, or we've talked about the book of creating memorable worlds, but what's the best way for people to connect with you, to learn more or to engage with you?
Awesome. Well, probably the biggest community that I have is on LinkedIn. I have a personal page, and of course, my business has a page. I have a website. It's called designerscreativestudio.com. If you really want to learn more about narrative experience design, you can definitely go there. There's courses. I have a huge media archive there of interviews and podcasts and things that I've done. I also have a YouTube channel that is. I haven't contributed much to it now, but what I tried to do was to build up a library of videos on all kinds of topics about the industry. And when I have people who are in university programs, or they're young professionals, they're really trying to learn and break in, I usually always send them to all these different content platforms, because there's a lot of stuff for free that they can learn from that I've provided. Also, I also have a coaching platform as well, where I do professional coaching. Actually, I was on this morning professional coaching with a gentleman from Singapore. So I coach people all over the world. It's the cheapest way to access my time. I try to keep that low so that it's accessible for everybody. But I do a lot of work with a whole full range of people, all the way from presidents of companies down to students, and talk through anything related to themselves, the industry, how to get them in there. But that's probably the best way. And you've had the website for the book up that gives you quite a lot of information about that as well. So hopefully that's a good range of ways to contact me.
Yeah, and I don't know if you did this by accident, but your SEO is pretty good, because you have how to be a theme park designer. That video has 14,000 views on YouTube, so that's pretty awesome. It's kind of like a secret gem, and now I can use it as a resource as well to send people to and look at myself. This is great.
What I typically do on LinkedIn, as somebody like a young professional will reach out and say, "I'm so glad I'm connected. Could we spend some time together? And could you, I have a lot of questions, of course." And my response is always, "I wish that I could spend time with everybody. I just, I gotta, make the beans to pay for bread on my table too." And so I have a link tree that I send that has all of this stuff in one go. And I usually send that to folks so that they can look through and curate the things that they want. And if there's items in there that are paid for that they want, great. But everything else is gratis. It's pro bono, free. You can look at, and hopefully it inspires and educates and empowers people. That would be my hope.
No, well, great. Well, like I said, we want to have you back on in the new year at some point, and maybe celebrate your book launch, whatever we can do to support it. But
Lovely.
it's always fun to talk to you. I know you and I have like talked for several hours on end, so this was just scratching the surface, and there were a lot of other things we could have talked about. But appreciate you for coming on the show. And with that, we'll bid you adieu. And everyone, thanks for following, liking, and subscribe. And make sure you go ahead and buy that book right now, pre-order, Creating Memorable Worlds and all that good stuff. Thanks so much, Theron.
Thank you.